Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Leoncio, and welcome to this Solarplaza webinar on market and grid parity in Italy. Italy is one of the strongest markets for solar. It's actually the second biggest market in Europe, with more than 20 gigs of solar installed. And at this moment, due to low solar costs and high electricity prices, and of course, lots of sunshine, Italy has reached market and grid parity for solar. So this means that solar can now compete with conventional energy sources. So it is my pleasure and honor to introduce two speakers from Italia Solare, the Italian PV Association, Emilio Sani and Paolo Rocco Viscontini, which will tell us a little bit more about market and grid parity in Italy. So the agenda for today looks like this. I'll start with a small introduction, and then Paolo Rocco Viscontini will tell us a little bit more about Italia Solare as an association, and Emilio Sani will go through the market and grid parity in Italy. We will finish with the Q&A, so make sure to stick around until the end. So we're doing this webinar as a prelude to our event Solar Market Parity Europe, which will be the 5th of June in Milan. And this conference is about the next step for solar. So that means subsidy-free solar. We're seeing a lot of subsidy-free solar projects popping in markets such as Italy, Spain, Portugal, Germany, and more. And this tells us that we're on the verge of a new solar revolution. These are some of the attending organizations that are confirmed for the conference. And this is our sponsors for the conference as well. For all of you who don't know about Solarplaza, Solarplaza was established in 2004, and since then we've organized more than 100 different events in more than 30 different countries worldwide, so that we can possibly impact the world by accelerating the sustainable energy transition. Some practical notes before starting. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat box, and Marco over here will help you. And please, if you have any questions, use the questions box, and we'll add them to the list, and we can answer them during the Q&A at the end. And feel free to put questions as soon as you have them. And the presentation slides will be available afterwards. So it is with pleasure that I introduce Paolo Rocco Viscontini, President and Founder of Italia Solare, and as well President and CEO of Enerpoint. He has been a pioneer in the Italian PV sector. He was there since the early 1990s, and he founded Enerpoint in 2001. He's now also a strategic consultant for top-tier global companies in the PV sector, and he studied electrical engineering at the University of Pavia. Paolo, I will hand you the controls, and you should be able to present now.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody to be connected. So I should go to the next step. Perfect. Just a few words regarding Italia Solare. In Italy, it's the only association dedicated exclusively to the PV sector. We are very active in creating the condition to have again strong PV market in Italy. The Italian solar community, we think, is now well represented thanks to our works, very, very deep into all the most important table. And we are active in the regulation, trying to give our support to the politicians and more technical institution to have a distributed energy production based on renewable and mainly on solar, photovoltaic solar. We have 6 working groups, as you can see, the different that are touching all the areas of work, and we are very open association involving all the members, also in the board directors. And we are now about 500 members, and we among which there are solar owners, installers, designer, EPC. So also very interesting, the energy traders are entering because solar will be more and more important. The next one. This is just one slide to show our activity in the territory. We organize several workshops around all Italy to start again to communicate to the convenience of solar and the new opportunities with the new prices, the new costs, as we said, and the new regulations that are under evolution. Okay. The next one, the Italia Solare is a member of Solar Power Europe, a member and founder of a Global Solar Council. In Italy, there is a Coordinamento Free, that is a group of all the renewable energy associations. This year we joined also Comitato Elettrotecnico Italiano, is practically the committee that is deciding all the technical rules for solar also, besides also the other electrotechnic areas. Okay, we can so market and grid parity. I'm sorry, there is a okay. So last year the installations have been 410 megawatt. It's interesting to see that only the 50% was for residential, mainly residential systems up to 20 kilowatt, benefiting of the tax deduction of 50% 10 years. But all the other installations, we can say most of them are in a real already grid parity situation, because they have been installed, they've been done without particular subsidies. For sure, some of them with some fiscal support, but as normal industrial investment. But it's very interesting to see that there are about 200 megawatt of systems that have been installed without feed-in tariff or subsidies like we saw in the past. So this is a signal. This is just the start. We believe also because already this year we see quite important changes, and the first grid parity utility installations are under construction. Mainly the target, the power is above 10 megawatt, and according to the areas are mainly in Sicily and Apulia. Then the lawyer Sani will explain better, but the authorization is for sure something of delicate. Now Sicily is deciding how to continue, because more and more projects are under development with several gigawatt under preparation. So we have to be careful to what is next, because for sure, from technical point of view, the economical point of view, this is affordable, it can be done, and the first examples demonstrate this. But we have to be careful to have a proper situation with the local regions that are worried about the occupation of the land. So there is availability, we can tell you, for some unofficial meetings that have already been done, but they want to see projects that are also taking into consideration the local need, leaving some parts of the areas to agriculture, and demonstrating that the projects can also benefit the local activity, creating some jobs. So to be very practical, this is then the trend that will be more and more followed by all the regions. As Italia Solare, we are now very active to find the right compromise between PV land occupation and the respect of agricultural activities. This is the main issue, and my suggestion is to keep this factor into great consideration, because to cover all the lands only with PV modules can be little in some way risky. There are some limitation to consider, and as Italia Solare, we are now working with regions to find a good framework, regulatory framework that can give also the fundamental security for the future. So this is just a first introduction of the situation in Italy, where I think there are very good opportunities also in the commercial side. for the self-consuming installations. And I leave the word now to Mr. Emilio Sani, that will enter more into details surely of your interest. And thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Paolo. Thanks for the presentation. Now to move on to the second part, Emilio Sani, he's a board member at Italia Solare. He's also a partner of the law firm Macchi di Celere Gangemi. I hope I pronounced that right. More than 20 years of experience in the field. He's a lawyer with deep knowledge of the regulatory and legislative processes, and he has a law degree from the University of Milan. So Emilio, I will cede you control now so that you can tell us a little bit more about market and grid parity in Italy.
Thank you very much to everyone for attending this conference. I will today introduce all of you to why this is the time to invest in Italy in production plants from PV source. In particular, we will go through the self-consumption and the convenience for the plants in self-consumption. That is something that is not very well known outside Italy, but there are very, very interesting opportunities of investment in Italy in the field of self-consumption. And we will go through the numbers of a possible business plan for the self-consumption and the possible way to construct a project for the self-consumption in Italy. First of all, the key factor that makes self-consumption convenient in Italy is the value of the energy self-consumed. The value of the energy produced for self-consumption for a client connected to a medium voltage grid is 120 euros per megawatt hour. And for the energy that is self-consumed by a residential user, it is 150 euros per megawatt hour. So we are talking of numbers that are about 3 times the value of the energy injected into the grid. And this is what makes a very interesting self-consumption in Italy. Why self-consumption has a so high value? Because in Italy, if you self-consume the energy, you do not save just the value of the energy, but you also save fees, the fees for the grid, for the transportation of the energy, the distribution of the energy, as well some taxes that are for the consumption of the energy. And overall, and what is more important, you don't pay the cost for the support to the renewables that in Italy is very, very high. So you have not only the saving for the value of the energy, but also you do not pay the network fees, the fees for the use of the grid. You don't pay the specific taxation that concerns the purchase of energy, and you don't pay the costs for the support to the renewables that are paid through the bill of electricity. All of this makes a big saving, as I mentioned before, 120 for clients in medium tension and 150 for domestic clients. Just 1 second that I come back to the right. Yeah, okay. The electricity bill in Italy has many components. Energy is not the highest component of the electricity bill. It's less than half of the electricity bill. Within the electricity bill, there are, as I mentioned before, also the cost for the use of the grid and the cost for the support to the renewables. Now, in this slide, you may find more or less what is the distribution of the different costs that you have in the bill of electricity. And all these costs are saved. These costs may be some way split in four main components: the energy price, that is the value of the energy, and the cost for the service of dispatching the energy into the grid. The network services that are distribution, transmission, and metering. General system charge, that is mainly the support to the renewables, and the taxation on the consumption of energy. Of these components, most of these components are variable, so are paid proportionally to the energy that you take from the grid. And any part of the bill of electricity that is paid proportionally to the amount that is taken from the grid is saved if it is self-consumed. So we will have dispatching costs that are variable, proportional to the energy that you take from the grid, and they are saved. The energy that is variable, that is saved. Transmission, that is saved. Support to the renewables, that is saved. And taxes for the consumption that are saved. All these components are saved if you self-consume energy. The only components that you pay in any case, because are fixed and are paid in a fixed amount respectively, if it is energy self-consumed or energy taken from the grid, are substantially distribution, metering, and part of the other charges. So now we could make an example for a possible price in a PPA in a self-consumption system. What does it mean? It means that if you are an investor and there is an industrial client that offers you the possibility to install a PV plant on the roof of its factory, you can install the PV plant on the roof of the factory of this industrial client. You own the PV plant and you sell the energy that you produce on the roof of the factory directly to the industrial client that is below. And if we make if we guess a possible price, we could guess a price that is a 5% discount on the price of the energy and a 15% discount on all the other fees and charges that are saved. And this may take that the investor who is selling the energy through this PPA by a direct cable has revenues of 53 euros per megawatt hour about for the energy and 56.5 euro per megawatt hour as premium for the sales charge. This means that in this PPA by direct cable, direct wire connection, the investor that built the PV plant on the roof of the factory has revenues for 110 euros per megawatt hours plus VAT, and the industrial client that is below has a saving of about 13 euros per megawatt hour because he allowed to the investor to build the PV plant on the roof. So without any investment, the industrial client saves 13 euros per megawatt hour. And the investor who built the PV plant obtains a price that is more than 2 times the price of the energy injected into the grid. So this is the option of a PPA. This is the option in which one investor owns and manages the PV plant that is built on the roof of the client. Another option is that the investor builds the plant on the roof of the factory of the industrial client, but does not manage directly the PV plant and rent the PV plant to the industrial client. So this structure is the operational lease. The operational lease is different from the PPA because you need to fix a price for the duration of the contract. And what is important is that in case of operational lease, there is an additional saving in respect of PPA, because also the consumption taxes are saved that in PPA cannot be saved. So this means that if an investor installs a PV plant on the roof of an industrial factory and agrees an operational lease for about 7-10 years, he may agree a fixed price around 115, 120 euros per megawatt hours, because the client on the other side has a saving that is around 135, 140 euros per megawatt hour. And this way, you have the advantage in respect of the PPA that you have an additional saving due to the consumption taxes. There is the worst aspect for the client that he has a fixed price, and it's easier for a client to accept a discount on the bill of electricity rather than a fixed price, because clearly it is more risky. So these are more or less the advantages and the disadvantages, considering the option between the operational lease and the PPA, because operational lease gives additional advantages and a higher opportunity of revenues because of the saving of the consumption taxes, but has the disadvantage that you need to fix a price, and the industrial client could be easier to accept a price that is a discount on the bill of electricity, because he's sure that he will not lose money in the future. Now, we have seen these that are the two main instruments for self-consumption in Italy, PPA and operational lease. Now we give a look to what are the requirements for a self-consumption system in Italy. First, the energy must be produced from renewable sources or cogeneration plants. Second, and this is the most important aspect to be considered because it's a big limitation, you can have just one client. So if you install the PV plant on the roof of one building, you cannot supply all the people that are located in the building, but you can have just one client, so one producer and one consumer of energy. It is forbidden at the time being to have more than one consumer of energy. And other requirement is that the production unit and the consumption unit must be physically connected through a private line, because if the energy runs through the public grid, you do not have all the savings that I mentioned before. So it's very important. If you are the investor that builds the PV plant on the roof, you can connect just one client, and you must connect such client through a private line that directly takes the electricity from the PV plant to the consumption unit. And other requirement is that the roof where the PV plant must be installed must be in an area that is in the availability of the person who consumes the energy. So, for instance, if we are in a shopping center, you may install the PV plant on the roof, and you may supply the energy to the store, the main store that is in the shopping center, only provided that the main store has the availability of the roof. The roof is not in the availability of the main store, but is in the availability of the owner of the shopping center, you will be able to supply the energy to the general services that are managed by the owner of the shopping center. Because the area in which you install the PV plant must be in the availability of the person who consumes the energy. And such person gives to a third party the possibility to install a PV plant for its self-consumption. Or alternatively, the person who consumes the energy may directly build and operate the PV plant by itself. So we also have an important subsidy in Italy to self-consumption that is net metering, that is valid for the plants below 200 kilowatts. Hypothetically, it is possible also above 200 kilowatts, but the benefit is very, very poor. So we must consider only until 200 kilowatts. And substantially, through net metering, you may obtain the reimbursement of the energy that you purchase up to the value of the energy that you injected into the grid through your PV plant. The problem of net metering is that, as most of you know, it cannot last a lot of time because the new EU rules provide that it should finish all over Europe in 2025 at the maximum. So this is something that in your business plan you may account just for a short period of time, because it is just for a few years. In addition, another advantage that there is in Italy for who install PV plant is that there is a special help to the investments. And if you do an investment at the service of the industrial sector, you may have amortization of such investment at 130% of the value. This means that for your PV plant, you have a cost of 10,000 euros. You may account for tax purposes this investment as 13 euros. And so you can have advantages in the deduction from the revenues of the costs, because you deduct a cost that is higher than the effective cost you borne for your PV plant. What is the key aspects? What are the key aspects to be checked before starting with a project for self-consumption in Italy. First, you must verify that are satisfied the requirements that I mentioned before. One customer only, direct connection, the production unit and the consumption unit in the same place. So you must first verify this. Second, you must verify the self-consumption of the client, because it's clear that the big value of the energy that I mentioned before, around 110 euros per megawatt hour, 120 euros per megawatt hour, is something that is valid just for the energy self-consumed. And for a few years, for the excess of energy, but as I mentioned before, net metering is something that is going to expire. So if you are looking into a medium long-term investment, you can rely just on the energy self-consumed, because net metering won't last a lot of time. So you must be very careful that the percentage of the energy self-consumed is very high, because the energy that is injected into the grid, if net metering will expire, or for the plants that are over 200 kilowatts, as a value that is the market value is around 50 euros per megawatt hour, and not 110, 120 euros per megawatt hour. So, in summary, the possibilities that you have if you want to implement self-consumption are self-production. That means that you are a customer and you make the investment for the construction of a PV plant in your productive site, and you directly consume the energy you produce without any agreement for the sale and the purchase of the energy, because producer and consumer are the same person. Another option is the operational lease, where you don't have any agreement for the purchase and sale of the energy, because the investor leases, rents the PV plant to the customer, and the customer produces through the components that are rented the energy that is self-consumed by himself. Finally, we have the two possible, the two kind of power purchase agreement in self-consumption that are allowed under the Italian regulation. One is the open PPA, and this means that the investor builds on the roof of the client the PV plant, sells to the client the energy that is self-consumed, and the excess of production is not owned by the client, but is owned by the producer, and he may freely trade it into the grid. So this is an option that is good, because if the client at a certain time does not pay or ceases its activity, you can at least trade your energy freely in the grid, and you want to take a revenue of 110 euros per megawatt hour, but at least you have a revenue that rise from the sale of the energy into the grid. Another option instead is that the producer of energy sells all the energy to the client, and so there is no distinction between the energy self-consumed and the excess of energy. This is a structure that has the advantage that the revenues of the producer are not linked to the percentage of self-consumption of the client, because you fix the price for all the energy, and it's a problem, an issue of the client whether he does not consume all the energy. The disadvantage of this structure is that it is more complicated to trade the energy through the grid if the client does not pay the energy and if the client ceases its activity. So I would say that the easier way is to have an open PPA that gives the securitization in case the client does not pay, gives the opportunity to sell the energy to the grid. Now, I would just mention shortly the possible PPAs also for the energy that is injected into the grid, because Italy gives good opportunity of investment, not only for self-consumption, but also for large-scale plants that inject energy into the grid. Why? Because, as you know, there are big values of irradiation in Italy, but also because we have very good market prices in Italy. Last year, in 2017, the market price of the energy in Italy was around 55 euros per megawatt hour, and was one of the highest in Europe, if not the highest price, market price in Europe. So also the opportunity to sell energy through the grid must be considered, because obviously the revenues are half than the revenues you have with self-consumption. But also the costs, if you build a plant in an agricultural area, are much lower rather than to build a plant on the roof of a factory or in a commercial area where usually are built the plants for self-consumption. We talked before about the power purchase agreement for self-consumption, but in Italy now we start to have also long-term PPAs for plants that inject energy into the grid. Whilst the energy self-consumed is traded in the PPA directly between the producer and the customer, for the energy injected into the grid in Italy at the time being, the contracts are not directly between the producer and the customer, but are between the producer and a wholesaler of the energy. These agreements between a producer and wholesaler of energy have a duration that is at the maximum 5 years now in the market. Until 1 year ago, we had the maximum duration of 1 year, but now, starting from end 2017 and 2018, we started to have several agreements with a duration of 3 years, and there is a start and now there are agreements with a duration of 5 years. But there is an alternative to the agreements with the wholesaler, because in Italy there is the possibility to request to a state-owned entity, that is GSE, to withdraw the energy from the producer. So there is also this good option that allows you always to have the possibility to sell your energy at the price of the pool. That is not so bad, as I mentioned before, because it is around 50 euros per megawatt hours. So there are substantially three options. One option is to sell the energy to the pool, and the price is not so bad because last year was around 55 euros per megawatt hour. The other option is to have a power purchase agreement with a wholesaler that may have, now you may find in the market a duration between 3 and 5 years. And the advantage is that for this period, you may fix a floor to your price. And so you may have a certain I may say, reliance on the revenues, because you know that there is a floor to your revenues for the 5 years of duration of the contract. Third option is to sell the energy to the state-owned entity, GSE, and this gives you the opportunity to take the price of the pool without doing all the bureaucracy for having access to the pool. Now, I would just mention shortly that new subsidies are now proposed by the government. We are not sure that they will be approved, but it is very, very likely that these new incentives will start within this year. And these kind of incentives are a big opportunity for the plants with self-consumption, because they give the certainty that if you do not consume the quantity of energy that was forecasted to be self-consumed, in any case, you have a fixed revenue, because the incentive does not give the incentive to the energy you self-consume, but gives the incentive for the excess of energy. So if you are assigned of this subsidy, you know that your excess of energy, not self-consumed, for 20 years may have a price that is at least 67 euros per megawatt hour. That is a good price. And this may help the financing of the plants for self-consumption. In addition, these new incentives may be useful for large-scale plants, but must be considered that they do not apply to the plants that are installed in agricultural areas. So most of the big plants can not receive this kind of support. This support may be granted only to the large-scale plants that will be installed in commercial or industrial areas. Shortly, what is the value of these new incentives? These new incentives for the plants between 100 kilowatts and 1 megawatt have a start price of 90 euros per megawatt hour, with a possible discount up to 30%. This means that it's very likely these incentives will have a value around 67 euros per megawatt hour, because it's very likely that the maximum discount will be the one that is assigned as a result of the tender. For the plants over 1 megawatt, the start price is 70 euros per megawatt hour, with a possible discount up to 70%. In this case, the discount is very high, so the tender won't take to the maximum discount, and the value of the incentives that are expected as a result of the tender are in between 55 and 60 euros per megawatt hour. So this kind of incentives should be approved in more or less 1-2 months. So if this is confirmed, we should have the first tender around in January next year. Now, thank you very much for your attention. I would dedicate 10 minutes to answer to possible questions because we raised a lot of items, and I am happy to clarify if there is a need of any clarification on what I mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emilio. Thanks for the presentation. And I can tell you that there are some questions here from the audience. And I invite again all the audience to ask the questions through the questions box so that we can ask Emilio any question you might have. Emilio, just to start with the Q&A, some of the people are asking if when you mean sale to the pool, do you mean the spot market?
Yes, indeed.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So we saw Paolo said that a lot of the grid parity, market parity activity is happening in the south, sort of like Sicily. Are the spot markets, the pool prices, the same all throughout Italy, or are there different markets depending on the region, and thus maybe the prices will change?
So the highest price on the spot market in Italy is in Sicily, because it is an island, and so it's a special market, and there is a very high market price. Second place is north of Italy, because is where there are all the industrial factories, and where there is the highest consumption of energy. So the highest prices are in Sicily and in the north of Italy. But also the price of the energy in the south of Italy is not so different from the price in Sicily and in the north of Italy.
Okay. Okay. And I mean, if we look, for example, at Germany, where they have a big penetration of solar, we've seen that sometimes during the midday, for example, or windy and sunny days, that the spot prices maybe go to even negative values. Is there, some type of mechanism to avoid this in Italy, or how is the spot market price settled?
So in Italy, notwithstanding the EU directive, negative prices are not allowed. So the minimum is zero. We, in any case, had a few risks, a few cases up to now in which we were closer to negative prices, and these were mainly in Sicily, because this was a place where there were lots of renewable plants. Currently, I do not see in Italy a big risk of lots of negative prices, as happens in Germany because of the offshore wind plants. I believe that currently there is not this risk. In a medium term, this could happen, but in the medium term also the way to consume the energy will change a little bit, and to storage systems and other mechanisms, a smart way to consume energy, I believe, will be some way found.
Okay, I think that's clear. Well, Emilio, Helmut from the audience is asking a little bit about the environmental effect. That the development in Sicily, has it been stopped by the local government to study the environmental effect? I think he refers to the agricultural, the land effect, and also that they have a pipeline of more than 100 megawatts under development, and they are a little bit afraid of this effect. Could you elaborate on this effect in Sicily?
I must stress that in Sicily, the will of the regional government is not to stop the installation of PV plants and wind farms. Simply, they told us that they intend to suspend it for 120 days because they are preparing a plan. And so they prefer to some way verify all the projects together on the basis of the new requisites, rather than now to approve projects that maybe won't be compliant with the new requisites. So I wouldn't say that the intention is to stop renewable plants. The intention is to verify all the projects together on the basis of the same requisites.
Okay, so then that should settle the, some being cautious about this effect. It's just a matter of time then before the Sicilian government decides to, yeah.
Yes, it's just a matter of time because it's necessary to build plants, PV plants and wind farms in Sicily, because if we do not install them in Sicily, we won't achieve the goals of the national strategy for energy and the goals of the European directives. So for sure they will be built. It's just a matter of applying the same rules to all the plants.
Okay, and can you elaborate a little bit on the goals of Italy? Just so that the audience knows what are the solar goals, renewable energy goals.
Yes, they are more or less the goals of the clean energy package directive, because more or less the idea is to have 55–60% of the electricity in 2030 that is produced from renewable sources.
Okay, and well, also a question from the audience, from Dejan. He's interested in the net metering scheme, and his question is specifically on what is the netting period in this scheme? Is it a yearly period? Is it monthly, or is it hourly?
No, this is a yearly period, but you must consider that this is a mechanism that is just for the plants up to 200 kilowatts, and that this is a mechanism that won't last a lot of time. So if you make a medium long-term business plan, you must rely mainly on the self-consumption, the actual self-consumption. And net metering is something that is useful to maximize in the first years the revenues. But you must plan in 3–4 years to install a storage system, or to have systems to have the maximum self-consumption, because it's something that is already under discussion, because it implies costs. High costs, because this is energy that is assumed to be self-consumed, but it's not. So for the grid, for the development of the storage systems, this is a big cost, and it's something that few years to be overcome.
Okay. It will be interesting to see what happens in a few years then. And Michele from the audience is asking that, well, you mentioned 4 options, right? Open and closed PPAs, operational lease, and self-consumption.
Yes.
And which of these options was the one that was used most in the last year in commercial industrial plants? And also, what do you expect for the upcoming years?
Okay.
Any trends that you see?
I would say that in the last years, 90% was self-consumption.
90, okay.
Because was the easier way, no?
Yeah.
But now we have a transformation, because now we had the approval of the new industrial tariffs from the Authority of Regulation for the Energy at the end of the last year. So we may rely that the industrial tariffs for more or less 3–4 years will be stable, And this is something that makes more attractive for investors to invest in self-consumption. So now I see that this year there is a big development of investments for PPA, mainly open PPAs, and for operational lease. Why? Because we had from the Authority of Regulation for the Electricity the approval of a medium-term framework for the industrial tariffs. So this make more reliable the business plan for the investors. So it's changing.
Okay, very interesting. Because, well, of course, we also see that a popular option in other countries is the resurgence of corporate PPAs, where big corporations are starting to source their energy through renewable resources. What is the current status of corporate PPAs in Italy?
So for self-consumption, as I was mentioning, this is something that is in strong development. For the energy that is injected into the grid, the problem of the corporate PPA is that for the energy that is not supplied from the producer, because we are talking about renewable sources, so you cannot supply the whole needs of the client. For the balance, he has to agree another agreement with the wholesaler that covers the balance of the electricity. And this may be expensive and not so easy to get. So it is much easier in Italy to have a corporate PPA through the wholesaler. What I mean? I mean that you, producer, make an agreement with the client, final client that will purchase the electricity, but is jointly involved the wholesaler that will be in the middle and will grant to the final client the supply of the balance of the electricity. So it's an agreement with 3 parties, not just 2. So I believe that for the way in which the Italian market of electricity is structured, it is much easier to have this kind of agreements with 3 parties, producer, client, and wholesaler, rather than agreements with just 2 parties, because the wholesaler is some way necessary to balance the electricity in the middle. And the client is key because gives the wholesaler the opportunity to rely on the fact that the electricity purchases will be purchased back at a certain price. And I believe that innovative agreements in Italy in this sector will be this way, with 3 parties.
Okay, thanks for the answer. And I think we can just take one last question, if that's okay. This is asked by George from the audience, and he says, given that there are gigawatts of pending licenses, is there an opportunity for any greenfield development of bigger than 1 megawatt project as we speak, with all the pending licenses of all the gigawatts?
Yes, there are a lot of pending. When you talk about pending licenses, you mean the pending applications for obtaining a license for the production of energy, I believe.
I think that's what. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Now the key point is that a framework for some way the criteria for the release of the licenses has to be issued. So now any region has its own rules for the grant of the licenses. And this creates a lot of confusion, and the takes to a stop of the issue of the licenses. So I believe that if the government will give some more precise guidelines, because we already have guidelines but are not so precise. If there will be more specific and precise guidelines, lots of licenses will be issued. It's clear that under the current regulation, the licenses that will be issued for plants in agricultural areas won't have access to the incentives, but the PV plants will go to the market and they will have their revenues through PPA, through the spot market, as I mentioned before.
Okay. Okay, I think that settles the Q&A. And just as a reminder to everybody in the audience, we have a handout from Italia Solare. So make sure to go to the handout section and so that you can download the roadmap to Italy. It's a brochure from Italia Solare. Any questions, feel free to contact Italia Solare. We'll be having Italia Solare, they are our supporting partner for Solar Market Parity. And they'll be speaking a little bit more about the Italian market. So this extending another invitation, the 5th of June in Milan. And with this, I would like to conclude the webinar. Thanks, Paolo. Thanks, Emilio, for the great presentation and for taking the time to present us the Italian market, which is has a positive and bright outlook for the future. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Emilio and Paolo again. And thank you. And hope to see you all in Milan in the 5th of June at Solar Market Parity Europe. Thank you.